I got to let you know this scares me to death because I'm on the World Wide Web and I hadn't shared my story this way. I also got to keep it real with you and let you know sharing my story always makes me nervous. I get jittery and I get a little anxious because I don't always know what God's going to bring out. I take time before sharing my story and I talk to God and I pray to God and ask that I be a vessel and not that it's all about me, that it's all about carrying the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm grateful today that I have a purpose and I have a reason to be alive because there was a time in my life that I didn't believe I did. And I believe that my story and your story are a lot alike. We have a lot of similarities. I may have some different circumstances and conditions, but the bottom line is I believe you can relate to being restless, irritable, and discontent and what the ism is of being an alcoholic. If you're new here and you don't know, please listen to what you can relate to. Listen to the insanity. Listen to the pain. Listen to the suffering, the misery that I put myself through, right? And that what I experienced in this disease. I like to get in the book a little bit in the doctor's opinion, XXVI, because I do have a disease that is mind, body, and spirit. And it says, we who have suffered alcoholic torture must believe that the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind. It did not satisfy us to be told that we could not control our drinking just because we were maladjusted to life, that we were in full flight from reality, or were outright mental defectives. And then I'm going to turn a page, XXVIII, in the classification. Something here that helps me. It says, we believe so suggested a few years ago that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. I will try and steer clear and remember that I'm an Alcoholics Anonymous, but it says any form at all, anything that changes the way I feel, right? That's what I've sought my whole life, is looking for an escape. I want something to give me a different effect. And essentially that's why I used alcohol, because I like the effects. Then it says, and at once having formed the habit and found they cannot break it, once having lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon things human, their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. Throughout the emotional appeal seldom suffices. The message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people must. The musts in this book are very important to me. Must have depth and weight. In nearly all cases, their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves. Then I jump over to XXIX, and it says, unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there is very little hope of his recovery. On the other hand, and strange as this may seem to those who do not understand, once a psychic change has occurred, the very same person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems he despaired of ever solving them, suddenly, and this is a promise, suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol, the only effort necessary being that required to follow a few simple rules. I don't know about you all, but I didn't come here wanting to follow rules, and I didn't need anyone to tell me how to live my life. I didn't come to Alcoholics Anonymous with the plan of one day at a time for the rest of my life. And I'm grateful that when I got here, you told me it's a day at a time, a breath at a time, a minute at a time. I could break it down if I needed to. And I've been able to use that over my time in Alcoholics Anonymous. My sobriety date is September 24th, 2003. I have a sponsor who has a sponsor, and I know my 3 great-great-grand sponsors. I sponsor women who sponsor women, right? This is not a hierarchy. This is simply one alcoholic passing it on to the next person. Because my problem is I have a problem with authority, right? If you think you're above me, or you're going to look down your nose at me and you're going to tell me how to live my life, I'm not going to be very cooperative. And I've learned in Alcoholics Anonymous, I need to humble myself and I need to put myself in a position to be in this spirit of cooperation. I can't fight with my sponsor and I can't fight with the women that I work with and the people in the rooms Why? Because I need each and every one of you to stay sober a day at a time, because I don't know what you're going to be able to say and what you're going to be able to share from your experience. It's going to be able to help me to grow. And the biggest thing that you're going to do for me is you're going to keep telling me I need to pray about it. Then I need to work steps on it. Right? When I come into the rooms, I had a 2-year plan. I'm going to get the state off my back. I'm going to get my kids back out of state's custody. And everything's going to be cool. And I'm going to learn how to drink like a lady. I'd heard about Alcoholics Anonymous. I knew it was not the place where you necessarily came to learn how to drink. I knew it was the place where you stopped. My mother had found the fellowship. And oddly enough, the one person my whole life I didn't want to be like, and I couldn't stand her, became the one person that gave me hope that if she could do it, I could do it, right? And I kept coming around the rooms, and I kept doing what I was hearing with the suggestions. Breathe in, breathe out, don't drink in between. I just had to want to be sober 51% because some days I didn't want it 100%. But the 51 was greater than the 49, and the 51 would enlarge. And so as I come into the rooms and I'm sitting there and I'm listening, and in my head, I'm really thinking there's no way these people are really talking about how they feel. There's no way possible you all can be this honest and this vulnerable in a room full of people. The only way I could find that was in the bottle. I could tell you all kinds of truths once I had that social lubricant. And I could bond with you and I could connect with you. But I also use that to manipulate you, right? And in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I've learned that I don't have to manipulate anybody with my experience. I can just get to relate and understand it and find freedom and get out of that being restless, irritable, and discontent. And I came to meetings and I listened and people shared, and I opened my mouth and I would share from time to time. And often I would hear, and I don't know if they were necessarily saying it to me, but I would hear it, that I would need to take the cotton out of my ears and put it in my mouth because I didn't have anything you all wanted to hear. You knew how to stay sober and I didn't. And that was the truth. I had tried over and over and over all the experiments that the book talks about over years and years, bargaining, pleading, going, I just can't get this, right? Like I said, my kids went into state's custody. 3 days prior to that, I'm standing in my living room. I'm schnockered out of my mind. And I throw my hands up and I say, God, help me. You know, I can't control it. I can't stop it. And my biggest fear is I'm going to lose my kids. And 3 days later, I lost my kids. And I said, what kind of God are you? I come to you and I was open and I was vulnerable and I shared with you my biggest fear and you made it come true. If you hear, I was the victim. I didn't take responsibility for my actions or my behavior. But through the process, I got involved in an outpatient, and it was called the Mother-Child Connection Program. And part of that was that the women had to go to meetings. And so I'm going to meetings. The first time I go into a meeting, I get handed how it works. I'm like, okay. And I introduced myself as an alcoholic. And there's a part inside of me that just went soft. I went, whew. And if you know what that is, it's like there's some relief. Intellectually, I didn't want to say that I was at home, but my spirit felt like, okay, we can rest a little here. And I was looking for a sponsor, and I was listening to the women, and I asked a couple of women to sponsor me, and for one reason or another, they didn't. And I swear to God, I had like this baby rat syndrome, right? That's really how I thought about myself. Like the mama rat gives birth and she knows when there's something wrong with one of them and she eats them, she kills it off because she knows it's not going to make it. I knew intuitively these women knew I wasn't going to make it. And that's why they're telling me no, because I really don't belong here. And I kept going to meetings, and I was driving to a meeting one night, and I'm about 3.5 months sober. And I look up and I said, God, now I don't really know who I'm talking to, and I'm talking to somebody that I've really not had a wonderful relationship with, much less necessarily believe that it's listening to me. But I said, you know, I've been coming here long enough that I'm hearing some stuff and I'm starting to get smart about it. I heard in how it works. I have a disease that's cunning, baffling, and powerful. I also heard in my home group, patient, progressive, and deadly. I can be so smart, I will find my way out of the rooms. But I need to be dumb so I can hear what you have to share with me. And I could identify that was happening with me. Because some of my fears is that people would see me as stupid. So I have to get smart quick, and I know how to be a mockingbird, right? But I walk into the meeting, and there's this lady writing on the dry erase board, and it's a lady I had looked at, and she's frowning her nails, and she's sharing out the book every time I see her in a meeting, and I'm not liking this lady. But it's very evident to me that this is who it is, that it spoke to me, is to be my teacher. And so I went and asked this lady to be my sponsor. And she tells me to go home and pray about it. She gives me other women's phone numbers. She introduces me to some of the other women. I'm like, okay, I'm going to pray. I'm in my bathroom praying because I'm living with an atheist, because that's the kind of relationship I need. I need somebody who's not going to get on me about this God business because I don't want to hear about it, right? But I'm in my bathroom on my knees praying at the toilet because I knew how to be there. I knew how to do that. And 3 days passed, and this lady said she'd be my sponsor. And a gentleman in my home group had already given me a book when I got there from my first meeting. Incidentally, my mother had gave me one about a year and a half prior. Now, it's something. I've not had to go back out so far, thank God. But I have read the big book drunk. When my mother brought it to me, I read it. And it was all about, yes, she needs that program. And yes, she owes me amends. And yes, right? There was nothing about me personalizing that book. And so as I get the book and I get with the sponsor, we're looking at Frankie, not Frankie's resentments, not everybody else's inventory. We're looking at me. And I'm meeting with her on a weekly basis, and I've got reading, writing, highlighting, vocabulary words because I need the dictionary because I don't understand how words were defined in 1939 when this book was printed, right? And I thought, well, that's okay, right? And I'm grateful that in the spiritual experience in the back of the book, it says some of us get this through the educational variety. And that's how I needed it. And that's okay because it got to my head and then it was able to move to my heart and I was able to live it, right? But the willingness was there, and I was honest enough to say, I don't know what this book is really saying to me, and I don't understand these words. And it was a part of me becoming humble to this process. And I'm in these steps, and I don't know so much that I like being powerless over anything, because rightfully so in some of my story, there are places where I was truly a victim. And for me to say that I'm powerless means I'm going to be putting myself in a position to be harmed. And so there was fears with that. But she said, Frankie, you're powerless over alcohol. What happens when you put it in your body? Can you control how much you take in? And can you stop and stay stopped? Do you find yourself obsessing and compulsing about it? Yes, I do. And I'm very grateful that she also told me as time goes by, I can put whatever word I need to put there besides alcohol. And I've done it with my children. I've done it with my bills. I've done it with my job. I've done it with my relationships, right? I'm powerless over people, places, and things. That's what you all told me. And I think I'm taking the power because I'm acting like God. But the whole unmanageability, whenever I first came into the rooms, there was no way in God's green earth I was going to tell you all that my children were in state's custody because I was ashamed. And what are you going to think about me? And for someone who had fought so hard her whole life to manage her emotions, for me to tell you that I couldn't manage those anymore either, because I was hearing it was about an inside job. I was so busy making sure that I was the perfect employee and my house was cleaned and the laundry was done and the meals were cooked, etc. But it was the inside stuff. What goes on inside of Frankie? Is the squirrel running on the cage? Are my emotions all over the place? That restless, irritable discontent, guilt, shame, remorse. I got all of this inside of me. And I had to get honest about it. The spiritual principle of the first step. No, I can't. I can't do this. I can't continue living like this. I want to die every day. And I start looking at the insanity, and I don't want to necessarily see myself as insane, but I can tell you I've done some insane things, right? I take off and I leave my children at home alone in the middle of the night so I can go drink and drive, and I've lost somebody to a drunk driver, and I know what that feels like, and I'm willing to put somebody else through that same emotional pain. But whenever I drink, I don't think about that stuff. Says I forget about that pain. I just go on and do what I want to do. And I acquire a DUI, and I'm over in a little bitty town next to us in Virginia, and they don't necessarily house women, but you walk in the door and there's a bench and there's a bathroom, and over this way there's where the cells are, and over this way is where the sheriff's department is. And they'd already done the roadside sobriety test, and the lady had taken me back to do the breathalyzer, and she said, no, this can't be right. She said, I want you to go sit back on the bench. I'm going to clean and recalibrate the machine, and I'll bring you back. She said, you should be dead, or you should at least be in the hospital. My sane thinking at that time is I go to the bathroom, and on the back of the toilet sits Windex, Comet, Tidy Bowl, bleach, Lysol, all of these chemicals. And my sanest thought is if I eat these things and I drink these things, that breathalyzer will come out right. To my knowledge, I hadn't had any bad experiences with that. Maybe I have. Maybe that's why I had to have a thyroidectomy in 2018. I don't know. But that was sane and logical to me. That made absolute sense. I would not go into my kitchen and open up my cupboard and eat or drink any of those things in my right mind, because I know that's one, not how it's supposed to be done. I know it's poison. I know it can be fatal. But in my mind, I don't think about that stuff. I don't think about consequences when I'm drinking. I do what I want to do, and I go where I want to go. And I'd gotten into a lot of self-destructive behavior that was really insane. And I was fearful for people to find out because they might institutionalize me. You know, knowing if somebody's into self-mutilating, well, then that must mean they want to die, right? Well, for me, it was just letting anger out, and that's how I understood it. And I couldn't get caught with people knowing that either. And I had acted out in so many ways, right? And I couldn't make sense of what was real and what was imagined anymore. The conversations I had with my head and what I'm saying to other people, day-to-day life is just overwhelming. And those words came to believe. Fortunately, in looking at my first step, I saw that there were times that something greater than me, something other than me, something cared about me when I didn't care. Something kept me alive. I didn't necessarily know how to identify it or call it. But as I get into the third step, I'm going to hand over my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand him. And that's a big one for me. I come from a family with a lot of religious abuse, spiritual abuse. I grew up around witchcraft, black magic. I wasn't protected from things. I've seen a lot of things. I was made to participate in a lot of things. And then as we went to church, it was a polar opposite life. We're sitting at home and there's the 700 Club and Tammy and Faye, the Bakers are on, and there's Bibles and study Bibles and notebooks and all this going on. And we're at church every time the doors open. And yet I'm not understanding why I still feel insane and crazy inside. But what I do know is by birthright, my biological father had sacrificed some children for power. And my life, in my mind, didn't have a reason. So I'm here totally by accident. And this is why I'm being sexually abused from the time I'm in diapers. This is why I'm getting dropped off at orphanages. This is why nobody seems to care. This is why I'm not connecting with anyone. But I had this odd thing happen that did help me. And it was that every night Jesus would come out of my bedroom closet and come talk to me. And I could relate to him because I'd seen the movies and heard the stories and about how he got beat and how he took on other people's sins. And absolutely, I could relate to being his sister in that way, right? And I just wished he would have seen God as cruel and ugly as I did. But that's not what happened. But that's the one thing whenever we talk deep down inside every man, woman, and child is this fundamental idea of God. I do believe in the Trinity. And I was able to hold on to that piece and that part. And so when you talk to me about handing over my will and my life over to the care of God, my will, my thoughts, my life, my actions, is these spiritual principles. And I had to go to good orderly direction because I had to let go of these ideas that were standing in the way of what this God was for me. Either God is or God isn't, Frankie. What's my decision to be? Well, obviously something somewhere has been taking care of me despite all the things that have happened in my life. And I understand man's will, free will, God's will. And I got quite envious whenever I was reading in We Agnostics. The agnostic actually has an easier time than those who've had religious experiences. And I wanted and wished so badly that that would have been my experience, that I would have never known, and then I wouldn't have had all of this to work out. But as I get into the fourth step, and my sponsor and I are going word by word, line by line, and she's showing me columns and how to do this. And so I start the columns, and she has me come over, and she's looking over it, and she says, Frankie, this is your inventory, not theirs. This is yours. I had to learn how to get on my side of the street and talk about what was really going on inside of me. What is it that's driving me crazy? And the reality is, again, I could sit and drink and tell you all my resentments. I could tell you all my fears. And I can do that sober. I can write it down on a piece of paper. And the memories and the emotions scared me because what if I go back out? I truly felt this is my one and only chance to get sober. And I wrote this inventory, and I was thorough, and I was as fearless as I could be, and I was honest with everything that came to mind. I wasn't allowed to scratch anything out. I wasn't allowed to skip over anything. And I say aloud in a good way, by guidance. I need guidance and I need structure. I didn't grow up with a whole lot of that. We moved a whole lot in my life, 6 to 9 times a year, connecting with people, sitting down and telling somebody my life story seemed really, really weird. But she said, if it comes to your mind, write it down. But first I was to start that writing with prayer. Ask God in and do that writing, and then I wouldn't feel alone. And I called her one day and I was just totally at arms. I'm like, what about this thing? She says, Frankie, you don't have to write it down if you don't want to. You don't. But recognize that's you with a reservation to go back out. I got off the phone with her and I threw my big book and I called her some names. I was pissed. Because again, it's squarely put on me, what am I going to do? Either God is or God isn't going to take me forward. And either I'm going to do this or I'm not. I already know that this thing I don't want to write down I've given it the power so that I'll drink over it. I'm grateful for my bottom. I'm absolutely grateful for my bottom. I wrote it down and I went over to her house with 3 packs of cigarettes, and I was very concerned that she had enough toilet paper. I get nervous and I gotta pee. And do you have enough coffee and cream and sugar? Because I'm going to drink a whole lot of that because it's what I do when I get nervous. And she assured me it's going to be okay. And I sat down with her and I told her everything. I told her everything. Like my life depended on it, because it does. And I carry that forward with me today. I continue to work the steps formally with my sponsors. I continue to read the book, look up the definitions again, refresh myself with it, because the book tells me in there 3 times, I believe, to study it. So not only do I study and get it to my head so I can move it to my heart so I can live it, but I've got after that depth and weight. Because if you're alcoholic like me and you've had the experiences I have, this isn't something I play with. And I don't want to see anyone else have pain, and so I try not to play with them either. This is life and death. No, we're not a glum lot. We get to go have fun and we get to hang out and we get to cut up about stuff. But we have a deadly disease. And so I sat with my sponsor and I told her everything. I went with my hair in a ponytail and no makeup on and sweat clothes, and in essence, metaphorically, about as naked as I could be with this woman. Here I am. And finally in my life, somebody knew everything about me. Through therapy, I didn't even feel that connected. I didn't feel that safe. And I didn't feel as though I could disclose that deeply. And we did the 5th step, and I was pretty certain through all of my writing that I had everything down, and I'm driving home and I've got the instructions for 6 and 7. And I go, Jesus Christ, how did I forget that thing? Right? You all told me it's a process, Frankie. Things are going to come up, right? And I called my sponsor when I get home and I say, hey, this came up. And she said, well, write it down. Let's go through it. And I did with 6 and 7. She introduced me to the book Drop the Rock, and it's been amazing. It was more elaboration. She incorporated the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 and 12 in my step work. You know, understandably, 2 years was substantial sobriety when the Big Book was wrote. They had like 15, 16 years when the 12 and 12 was. And the emotional sobriety that Bill wrote about, that's what I'm after. I want to be emotionally sober. And when I can become emotionally sober, that means in my spiritual connection with life, with God, I can say, yes, I can see there's a reason and a purpose. Maybe I don't necessarily like it. The Big Book talks about acceptance is the answer to all of my questions. It doesn't necessarily mean I like it. I can accept it as just the way it's supposed to be right here, right now, and that I particularly don't care for it. And that's okay. That's my character defects, my ideas, and Frankie's will in play, that it should be something different. And as I sat down and did that 4th step, we got my 8th step list off of that. We had my character defects list off of that. And had touched on what the 9th step work was going to be, because there's no need to redouble over this work, right? But we are going to double back and look at some things. And so when I get to the 9th step, well, I've got my list on my 8th step, right? And it's telling me that there's other harms. What other harms? I didn't think about the spiritual harms. Those belonged on there. I harmed a lot of people spiritually. I messed with a lot of people, their minds, when I was out there. I put my hands on people. You know, part of my recovery today is don't drink, don't drug, don't go to jail. You know? And I feel blessed that there are women in my life, there are people in my life that I can talk to so that I don't have to go to those 3 things. Right? And that I have a God of my understanding that I can talk to. So I'm in the 9th step and I'm making those amends to people. I didn't come in with a bunch of financial amends. I watched in my home growing up, there was a lot of rent to own that got brought to the house, and then it got repossessed, and cars that got repossessed. So I was very insistent that one of my rules of manageability was as long as my bills are paid, everything's okay over here, right? But I had a lot of direct amends with my children. I have 4 children, and direct amends with other people that I have been involved with in various ways in my life or had contact with, because it's no joke. I was that tornado rip-roaring through people's lives, and I harmed them. And I really thought that I was somebody, and I took power from that. If I could hurt you before you hurt me, I was doing well. And then it's not necessarily called it in the big book, but those living amends, where I continue, because if I sincerely mean that I've done my third step and I'm handing over my will and my life, and I'm asking for those character defects to be removed, my part is to do the footwork. The amends is that I keep the changed behavior. And fortunately for the 10th step, I get to do that spot check inventory, that annual inventory, and I get to try and keep it clean, right? Because I do fall short. I make mistakes and I harm people inadvertently. I can have the bedevilments even sober. Problems with my job, problems with relationships, problems. They come up. It's part of living life. And it's also part of growing. And I get into the 11th step where I've got this prayer and meditation thing going on, and I'm not really sure what that's supposed to be. Maybe some Buddha thing on top of a mountaintop, or some kind of music, or some kind of guided. And so I really had to explore what that meant to me. I asked people in the rooms. I asked my sponsor. My sponsor was always really good to tell me that I could talk to her about what was going on with my life, but also that I was to bring it to the rooms and talk to you all and get another perspective, get other people's experiences, because she didn't have all the answers. But as I'm doing this 11th step, it's multifaceted. I'm getting my book here, break it down. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God. It's okay, again, that it might be an educational, because if I'm doing something different, I'm learning something, right? And I'm going to bring it to the forefront of my mind. And I'm going to be able to look at all of these ideas that have stood in my way of what prayer and meditation is and what it's going to be for me. And I'm going to improve this conscious contact with God. I'm not taking this time to, well, God, tell me how to improve my relationship with my children, or how to improve it with my husband, or how to prove it with. First, I need to get my house in order with God, so that eventually I'll be able to intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle me. And as I'm going through this, as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out, it's going to require me to use a lot of that courage and practicing faith and hope in the things that I've learned in the previous steps. But that's about me being spiritual awareness. I can hear God of my understanding in the birds, in the sunrise, in the sunset, in music. And then because of having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, not because of therapy, not because of these steps. Now the book tells me that I can go outside of the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and get the help I need. And I do that because we talk about alcoholism. I'm not going to come in here and talk to you all about how to handle my PTSD. That's not y'all's business. Your business is to help me to stay sober if I want to stay sober. And having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics. I try. I don't force it down anyone's throat. Nobody could force it down my throat. It was brought to me. It was presented to me. Here, Frankie, here's a big book. Here's some phone numbers. My mother had been to the local meeting, got the women's phone numbers, told me there were friends, told me there were people that cared about me, told me there were people that were praying for me, but nobody could make me get in that car and go. And quite frankly, when I was with the Mother-Child Connection program, they couldn't make me either. I could have just not went. It was the last part of the day. And to practice these principles in all our affairs. It's not telling me to go have affairs sober. It's telling me to practice these in every aspect of my life. And I do that. And it's to being service to God and my fellow man. I'm supposed to fit myself to be of maximum service to God and others, and I try that. I try to do that. Can I get a drink? I'm awful thirsty. I came in Alcoholics Anonymous and I wanted the one and done sponsor. That's not been my experience. And I think that's God having a sense of humor for me. You know, I took a lot of comfort at first. So I'm just going to tell one person my whole story, and that's the only one who's ever going to know. And I never intended to sit down with other sponsors and say, okay, here I am. Right? Because I kind of get tired of telling my story, and I wish you would just already know it. But I got to let some people know exactly what it is that makes Frankie tick. Right? And so I stay with sponsorship. I did have a period of time in 2016 for 8 months that I didn't have a sponsor, and I'm going to tell you I was scared to death. Scared to death. If I don't have a sponsor, then I have a fool for a sponsor. I know what I did in the meantime is I continued to talk to the women that had sponsored me previous. I talked to the women I sponsor. I talked to others in the room. I continued practicing these principles in all of my affairs, and I kept praying and asking God, bring me my sponsor. I continued to remain vulnerable, transparent, and honest with those around me to a degree that they got to know me even deeper, and that was a blessing. I got to take off some more of those masks and let you see who I am, right? I've had some experiences in sobriety I didn't think I would be able to stay sober through. And it's amazing what this program can do when we work it. I've been through some traumatic things, even sober. With PTSD, I have flashbacks every once in a while. I personally don't take medication for it. I don't suggest that be what you do, right? That's what I do. Medication is an outside thing. Talk to your doctor. I'm not a doctor. I'm not your doctor. But I come in and I get honest with you all. I get honest with myself. I get honest with others. And as I go through these traumas and these flashbacks and these things in my life, it's okay for me, again, to be honest. Because you told me if I don't have honesty, I don't have anything. And if I can't get honest with myself, I'm not going to be able to be honest with you. And when I get honest with me, I find that I tend to get honest with God before I ever come to you. And that seems to be the exact order that it happened in the fifth step as well. You know, it becomes a working part of the mind, like the book said. And I didn't think that was real either. For a girl that come into the rooms who didn't trust God, who didn't want anything to do with God, much less a spiritual program, because I saw the word God and I knew you were backdooring me into some church stuff. And it's not about that. The spirituality of this program is a personal relationship with the God of my understanding, a higher power. It's not about what I think it is. It's what has my experience been. Try not to invite my mind into creating what God is. It just is. I've already been asked the question in the third step. Either God is or God isn't, Frankie. God is these things or he's not these things. And buried three significant people in 1 year in 2016. My mother-in-law, a stepson, and my mother. And that was a pretty big year. And I felt like it took me like a good 2 years just to kind of emotionally process all of that. And with my mother, there was a lot of trauma. And things that didn't come up on for years and years and years of my own 4-step writing came out. And I thought, good God, all this writing I've done and I've gotten nowhere. No, it's taken everything and every bit that I've done to get me to that place where I was ready for that next thing, for the next. And I'm grateful the big book says that for some of us, this comes piecemeal. You didn't shove it down my throat. You didn't tell me it had to happen a certain way. You just said, Frankie, do the footwork. Trust God. In the book, I was told read the black, not the white, because I like to make up things of what it's saying. I was told trust the book. The book hadn't killed anybody. I've recently made some pretty big changes. I've changed. I found myself in a stuck spot with my sobriety, and this is where I am today. And some of this thinking of, well, with 17 years sobriety, you should know. That's pride, that's ego, that's all that BS stuff, right? It's 17 years sobriety, I know what I need to be doing, and I need to take these actions, right? So I've made 3 significant changes. I've had to change my home group, I've had to change my sponsor, and I've had to change the service that I do. And I'm really excited about this experience that I'm going to have right now. I've heard some speakers talk about it, that there was one guy, he had like 40 some years of sobriety, and he talked about he doesn't like to have a sponsor with more than 5 years because they're on fire, they're excited, there are a lot of things. And so I have a sponsor with less sober time than me, but she is on fire right now. She's excited about this program. She's helping me get plugged back into service work and finding my passion again. I love this program, and I love this literature, and I love the life that I have found today. And it literally is beyond my wildest dreams. What I sat down and wrote in the beginning of my sobriety of what my life would look like, on the story in the back of the book, I sold myself short. And I'm grateful that I was willing to let go of my ideas, my plans, and my ways to have a new experience. And I like to set aside prayer. God, help me set aside everything I think I know about you, that I think I know about myself, that I think I know about this book. And I even like to add that I think I know about my life, that my job, just fill in the blank again. I get to have a brand new day every day. And I get to start my day over, and I get to have new moments and new experiences. And that's part of the miracle for me. For a girl who thought her whole life was going to be just sucking. I had resigned myself that I would be dead at the age of 32, and I was okay with the fact that I wasn't going to see my children graduate high school, much less college, the service, or become a grandmother. I am here 17 years, longer than I intended to be, and thank God my plan didn't work, and God's does. And let's see. I like listening to, was it Father Downing talking about prayer and meditation and talking about God. That is what this program's about, is finding a power greater than myself. It is to be taken with caution when trying to express to others what that is. I can share it in a general way, because the reality is you got to find yours like I had to find mine. I can tell you what worked for me. It was good orderly directions. It was spiritual principles. It was practicing humility. It was practicing being honest about there's things I don't know. And I don't know what life holds for me. I don't know what's going to change day to day. I don't know what's going to remain the same. But I do know that I get to look at my life and I get to see blessings, and I get to see miracles around me every day. I get to watch people walk into this room, and I get to watch them get sober, and I get to watch the lights come on in their lives. And it keeps me excited. It keeps me fired up too. I feel like I'm coming to the wrap up and the coming down to it. But this is an amazing journey. I wouldn't trade it in for anything. Absolutely wouldn't trade it in. This is my way of life. It has given me a design for living. It's not something I pull out of my pocket when I walk into the rooms and share in a meeting. It's not something that I just whip out whenever I'm sitting in front of my sponsor or the women I sponsor or doing service work. Because if I'm going to take off the mask and I'm going to be who I am, I get to be who I am wherever I go, because I'm done running away from me. I learned here that wherever I go, there I am. and I don't have to live in fear of being found out, or you're going to know something about me from this other person. I live my life as an open book. Instead, I don't have to live in guilt, shame, and remorse. Do I still have selfishness and self-centeredness? Yep. The book says that's the root of all my problems. And that's what keeps me, thank God, in the steps. Because if those were absolutely removed from me, I wouldn't need a God of my understanding, and I sure wouldn't mess with steps 6, 7, 8, and 9. And, if I wasn't selfish and self-centered, I might stay at home and disconnect from everybody and get into isolation and allow this disease to take me back out. But I know there's a solution today, and it's not me, and it's not what I found in the bottle. It's in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's in a spiritual awakening. Thank you for letting me share.